You open your banking app in the grocery store checkout line, not because you forgot your password, not because you're transferring money, because you need to check if buying one more thing will stress you out later. And the weird part is, you technically make decent money now. A few years ago, the version of you making this salary would have thought you finally made it. You imagined freedom, breathing room, maybe even confidence. Instead, your paycheck lands and disappears almost instantly. Rent, car payments, subscriptions, insurance, random emergencies, food delivery because you're exhausted. Then somehow your account is already lower than expected, and you can't even explain where it went. So you start thinking maybe you're just bad with money. Maybe everyone else secretly understands something you don't. But here's the thing. The reason your first 100,000 feels impossible has almost nothing to do with intelligence, and very little to do with investing. In fact, this is the part nobody talks about. The first 100K is mostly psychological warfare, not financial warfare. Because before money compounds, your habits compound first. And once you understand the hidden shift that happens before 6 figures, your entire approach to money starts changing. Not overnight, not magically, but permanently. Stick with me. Because the people who eventually build wealth usually realize one uncomfortable truth much earlier than everyone else. Your income matters, but your financial identity matters more. Most people think building wealth starts with investing. It doesn't. It starts the moment you stop using every dollar to prove something. And if that sounds dramatic, think about your own life for a second. How many purchases were actually about survival? And how many were about relief? That new phone because you deserved it. The nicer apartment because you were tired of feeling behind. The expensive weekend because work drained you. The newer car because everyone around you looked like they were upgrading. None of those decisions feel irrational in the moment. That's why this trap is so powerful. You're not reckless. You're exhausted. There's a difference. And this is exactly why the first 100K feels brutally slow. Because early wealth building is not about multiplying money. It's about creating space between your emotions and your spending. That's the real game. But here's where it gets interesting. Once you hit around $100,000 invested or saved, something strange starts happening. Your money finally starts contributing more than you do. Not emotionally, mathematically. And that changes everything. Imagine you've invested 100K, a normal market year at 10%. Growth means your money grows by roughly $10,000 without you touching it. Now compare that to the beginning. When you had $1,000 invested, a great year only made you about $100. That difference feels invisible at first, which is why most people quit before compounding becomes emotionally real. Your brain struggles to stay motivated when the rewards feel microscopic. Saving your first few $1,000s can feel like carrying water with a spoon. Slow, annoying, almost fake. Meanwhile, social media keeps showing people buying homes at 27, driving luxury cars, taking casual vacations in Greece, and pretending it all happened naturally. So your progress starts feeling embarrassingly small. But it's not small. It's foundational. And this is the part most people miss. The first 100K isn't powerful because of the number itself. It's powerful because of the behaviors required to reach it. You become someone who can delay gratification, someone who can tolerate slow progress, someone who stops needing immediate emotional rewards every weekend. And honestly, that identity shift is rarer than the money, because most people never fully escape reactive spending. They increase income, but they increase emotional consumption too. A raise becomes permission, not leverage. That's why someone making 55K can quietly build wealth while someone making 120K still feels financially trapped. The gap is rarely math alone. It's behavioral momentum. Think about how most financial advice sounds. Cut coffee. Spend less. Budget better. That advice usually fails because it treats you like a spreadsheet instead of a human being. You already know overspending exists. That's not the issue. The real issue is that modern life constantly pushes you toward emotional spending without calling it emotional spending. Bad day at work? Treat yourself. Feeling behind in life? Upgrade something. Lonely? Order food. Buy gadgets. Book a trip. Stressed? Convenience suddenly feels necessary. And here's the dangerous part. Most of these purchases are socially rewarded. Nobody congratulates you for maxing out your Roth IRA. But people notice a new car instantly. They notice vacations instantly. They notice upgraded apartments instantly. So your brain slowly starts associating visible consumption with personal progress, even when your net worth says otherwise. And this is exactly why the journey to 100K feels emotionally confusing, because externally it can look like nothing is happening. Your life might even look worse temporarily. You drive an older car longer. You skip upgrades your friends normalize. You keep roommates longer than expected. You say no more often. At first, that feels like falling behind. But financially, you're building an engine most people never build. And here's where it gets interesting. The first stage of wealth building is brutally unfair because effort and visible reward are completely disconnected. You might save $20,000 and still feel anxious. You might invest consistently for 3 years and barely see dramatic growth. You might feel like you're doing everything correctly, while your account moves painfully slowly. That phase discourages almost everyone, because humans are wired to continue behaviors that produce quick, visible rewards. In the beginning, your contributions matter more than your returns. Later, your returns matter more than your contributions. That's the crossover point people dream about. And for many investors, that shift starts becoming noticeable around the first 100K. Let me show you what this actually looks like. Say you invest $800 a month. At first, progress feels tiny. Year 1 might feel exciting because it's new, then year 2 feels repetitive. By year 3, motivation gets weird because your lifestyle sacrifices still feel bigger than the results. But around the time your investments reach larger numbers, the math starts accelerating. A decent percent market increase on $10,000 gives you $1,000. A decent percent increase on $100,000 gives you $10,000. A decent percent increase on $300,000 gives you $30,000. Notice what changed? Your effort didn't triple. The engine did. And this is why wealthy people become obsessed with protecting momentum. Because eventually time becomes more valuable than intensity. Missing a few investing years early on can quietly cost hundreds of thousands later. Not because you failed, because compounding hates interruptions. Here's a simple example. Imagine 2 people. One starts investing at 25 and invests modestly for 10 years. The other waits until 35 but invests much more aggressively afterward. The first person often still ends up ahead. Why? Time multiplied their consistency, not perfection. And honestly, that should relieve some pressure. Because you do not need to become a millionaire overnight. You need to stay in the game long enough for the math to stop working against you. That's it. But here's the psychological shift nobody warns you about. Once your investments start growing noticeably, your relationship with spending changes automatically. You stop seeing purchases only in dollars. You start seeing future value. A $300 impulse purchase no longer feels like just $300. Your brain quietly translates it into potential future growth. That same money invested repeatedly over years could become thousands later, not through magic, through time. And suddenly wealth building stops feeling restrictive. It starts feeling strategic. That's a completely different mindset. You're no longer depriving yourself. You're choosing future flexibility over temporary emotional relief. And that shift changes career decisions too. Because when you have growing assets, you panic less. You tolerate toxic jobs less. You negotiate differently. You take smarter risks. You stop feeling trapped by every paycheck because your survival no longer depends entirely on next Friday. That emotional stability is one of the most underrated benefits of wealth. Not luxury, not status, options. And this is the part nobody talks about enough. The real reason the first 100K changes your life is not because you suddenly feel rich. You probably won't. In fact, most people who reach that milestone still feel strangely normal. They still compare themselves to others. They still worry sometimes. They still hesitate before large purchases. But internally, something fundamental shifts. For the first time, your money starts creating breathing room instead of constant recovery mode. And breathing room changes behavior. When you're financially fragile, every decision feels urgent. A car repair feels catastrophic. A medical bill feels personal. A job loss feels like your entire identity collapsing. That pressure forces short-term thinking. You optimize for immediate survival. But once you build meaningful savings and investments, your brain starts operating differently. You think longer term. You become more patient. You stop chasing every shiny opportunity because you're no longer desperate for instant financial transformation. And weirdly enough, that patience often creates better results because desperation is expensive. Desperate investors chase hype. Desperate workers stay underpaid because they fear uncertainty. Desperate consumers buy status to temporarily feel successful. But stable people move differently. They pause. They calculate. They wait. And over decades, those tiny behavioral differences become massive wealth gaps. Here's where it gets interesting. Most financial breakthroughs actually happen quietly. No fireworks. No dramatic movie scene. Usually it's a random Tuesday when you realize something small. Your emergency fund handled a crisis without panic. Your investments grew more this year than you personally contributed. Your credit card balance stayed at zero after an unexpected expense. Or maybe you simply notice you're no longer afraid every time your phone buzzes with a banking notification. That emotional calm is a bigger flex than most luxury purchases. Because stress reduction is one of the highest return investments money can buy. And yet most people delay building that stability because they think wealth is supposed to look exciting. That's the trap. Real wealth often looks boring at first. Consistent investing, automatic transfers, stable cash flow, reasonable housing costs, cars you keep longer, quiet financial discipline. None of that photographs well for social media, but it creates something much more valuable than attention. It creates autonomy, the ability to make decisions without immediate financial fear. And once you experience that feeling, your priorities start changing automatically. You stop obsessing over looking rich. You start obsessing over staying free. That's a massive psychological evolution. Because freedom-based spending and status-based spending lead to completely different futures. One buys appearances. The other buys time. And time is the real asset everyone secretly wants. Time to leave a bad job. Time to recover from burnout. Time to spend with family. Time to think clearly without financial panic constantly sitting in the background. The people who eventually build serious wealth understand this earlier than everyone else. They stop asking, and what can I buy right now? And start asking, what does this decision cost future me? That question changes everything. Because every recurring payment steals future flexibility. Every unnecessary debt obligation reduces future options. Every lifestyle upgrade quietly raises the amount of money required just to feel normal. That's why lifestyle inflation becomes so dangerous around income growth. You finally start earning more, but your baseline expenses rise just as fast. Suddenly, the nicer apartment becomes mandatory. The luxury car becomes emotionally untouchable. The expensive habits become part of your identity. And now your higher income doesn't create freedom. It creates maintenance pressure. That's why some high earners secretly feel trapped. Their lifestyle expanded faster than their assets. But the people who reach financial stability earlier usually do something different. They increase investments before lifestyle. They protect margin aggressively. They let income growth strengthen their balance sheet instead of immediately upgrading every visible part of life, not because they hate fun, not because they're miserly, because they understand momentum. And once financial momentum starts compounding, protecting it becomes addictive in the best possible way. You realize wealth is less about one giant breakthrough and more about removing small leaks for long enough that the engine finally builds pressure. So if your progress feels slow right now, that does not mean you're failing. It probably means you're still in the hardest stage, the invisible stage, the stage where your habits are changing before your results become dramatic. And honestly, that's where almost everyone quits. But if you stay consistent long enough, eventually your money starts working harder than your motivation does. That's when the game changes. Not because you became a different person overnight, because you became slightly more patient than your past self, slightly less reactive, slightly more intentional. And over time, those slight differences create entirely different lives. The first 100K is not magical because it makes you rich. It's magical because of who you had to become to reach it. A person who thinks ahead. A person who values freedom over appearances. A person who understands that wealth is not built through one perfect decision, but through hundreds of quiet decisions nobody claps for in the moment. And once that identity locks in, the second 100K usually comes much faster, because now you finally understand the real secret. Wealth grows slowly, until one day it suddenly looks fast.